and welcome back to my corner of the internet. My name is Shannon, and tonight we're going to be reading 2 more chapters from Emily of New Moon. If you're new to this series on my channel, you can go, there's a whole playlist filled with the first 22 chapters, and otherwise you can just sit and listen for a little while and then be on your way. Anyway, we're able to do this thanks to Project Gutenberg, which is a website where they archive all old novels that are, I believe it's 70 years or older, and you can read them there for free. It's kind of public domain. You can do what you like with them. So we're just reading it here together. And once we're done this one, we're gonna move on to another one. And we're not sure yet which one that's gonna be, but once we get to the deciding part, once we're done this book and we're gonna decide on a new one, I'll have a poll on my community tab. So keep an eye out for that and you can vote on the next novel we read. Let's just get on into it. Chapter 23 deals with ghosts. "Your aunt is in the back parlor," said Caroline Priest. "Come this way. Are you tired?" "No," Emily said, following Caroline and taking her in thoroughly. If Caroline were a witch, she was a very small one. She was really no taller than Emily herself. She wore a black silk dress and a little string cap of black net edged with black ruching on her yellowish white hair. Her face was more wrinkled than Emily had ever supposed a face could be, and she had the peculiar gray-green eyes, which, as Emily afterwards discovered, ran in the Priest clan. "You may be a witch," thought Emily, "but I can manage you." They went through the spacious hall, catching glimpses on either side of large, dim, splendid rooms. Then through the kitchen end, out of it into an odd little back hall. It was long and narrow and dark. On one side was a row of 4 square small-paned windows, and on the other were cupboards reaching from floor to ceiling, with doors of black shining wood. Emily felt like one of the heroines in a Gothic romance, wandering at midnight through a subterranean dungeon with some unholy guide. She had read the mysteries of Udolpho and the Romance of the Forest before the taboo had fallen on Dr. Burnley's bookcase. She shivered. It was awful, but interesting. At the end of the hall, a flight of 4 steps led up to a door. Beside the steps was an immense black grandfather's clock, reaching almost to the ceiling. "We shut little girls up in that when they're bad," whispered Caroline, nodding at Emily as she opened the door that led to the back parlor. "I'll take good care you won't shut me up in it," thought Emily. The back parlor was a pretty quaint old room where a table was laid for supper. Caroline led Emily through it and knocked at another door using a quaint old brass knocker that was fashioned like a cheesy cat, with such an irresistible grin that you wanted to grin too when you saw it. Somebody said, "Come in," and they went down another 4 steps. Was there ever such a funny house? Into a bedroom. And here at last was great Aunt Nancy Priest, sitting in her armchair with her black stick leaning against her knee, and her tiny white hands, still pretty and sparkling with fine rings, lying on her purple silk apron. Emily felt a distinct shock of disappointment. After hearing that poem in which Nancy Murray's beauty of nut-brown hair and starry brown eyes and cheek of satin rose had been re-rhymed, she had somehow expected great Aunt Nancy, in spite of her 90 years, to be beautiful still. But Aunt Nancy was white-haired and yellow-skinned and wrinkled and shrunken, though her brown eyes were still bright. Somehow she looked like an old fairy, an impish, tolerant old fairy who might turn suddenly malevolent if you rubbed her the wrong way. Only fairies never wore long gold-tasseled earrings that almost touched their shoulders, or white lace capes with purple pansies in them. "So this is Juliet's girl," she said, giving Emily one of her sparkling hands. "Don't look so startled, child. I'm not gonna kiss you. I never held with inflicting kisses on defenseless creatures simply because they were so unlucky as to be my relatives. Now, who does she look like, Caroline?" Emily made a mental grimace. Now for another ordeal of comparisons wherein dead and gone noses and eyes and foreheads would be dragged out and fitted on her. She was thoroughly tired of having her looks talked over in every gathering of the clans. "Not too much like the Murrays," said Caroline. "Not so handsome as the Murrays." Not the stars either. Her father was a handsome man, so handsome that I'd have run away with him myself if I'd been 50 years younger. There's nothing of Juliet in her that I can see. Juliet was pretty. You're not as good looking as that picture made you out, but I didn't expect you would be. Pictures and epitaphs are never to be trusted. Where's your bang gone, Emily? Aunt Elizabeth combed it back. Well, you comb it down again while you're in my house. There's something of your grandfather, Murray, about your eyebrows. Your grandfather was a handsome man and a darn bad-tempered one, almost as bad-tempered as the priest. Say, Caroline. If you please, Great Aunt Nancy, said Emily deliberately. I don't like to be told I look like other people. I look just like myself. Aunt Nancy chuckled. Spunk, I see. Good. I never cared for meek youngsters, so you're not stupid, are you? No, I'm not. Great Aunt Nancy grinned this time. Her false teeth looked uncannily white and young in her old brown face. Good. If you've brains, it's better than beauty. Brains last, Emily. Beauty does not. Me, for example, Caroline here now, never had neither brains nor beauty, had you, Caroline? Come, let's go to supper. Thank goodness my stomach has stood by me, if my good looks haven't. Great Aunt Nancy hobbled by the aid of her stick up the steps and over to the table. She sat at one end, Caroline at the other, Emily between, feeling rather uncomfortable, but the ruling passion was still strong in her, and she was already composing a description of them for one of her blank books. I wonder if anybody will be sorry when you die, she thought, looking intently at Caroline's wizened old face. Come now, tell me, said Aunt Nancy, if you're not stupid, why did you write me such a stupid letter that first time? Lord, but it was stupid. I read it over to Caroline to punish her whenever she's naughty. I couldn't write any other kind of letter, because Aunt Elizabeth said she was going to read it. Trust Elizabeth for that. Well, you can write what you like here and say what you like and do what you like. Nobody will interfere with you or try to bring you up. I ask you for a visit, not for discipline. Thought likely you'd have enough of that at New Moon. You can have the run of the house and pick a beau to your liking from the priest boys. Not that the young fry are what they were in my time. I don't want a beau, retorted Emily. She felt rather disgusted. Old Kelly had ranted about beaux half the way over, and here was Aunt Nancy beginning on the same unnecessary subject. Don't you tell me, said Aunt Nancy, laughing at her gold tassels as her gold tassels shook. There never was a Murray of New Moon that didn't like a beau. When I was your age, I had half a dozen. All the little boys in Blairwater were fighting about me. Caroline here and now never had a beau in her life, had you, Caroline? Never wanted one, snapped Caroline. 80 and 12 say the same thing and both lie, said Aunt Nancy. What's the use of being hypocrites among ourselves? I don't say it isn't well enough when men are about. Caroline, do you notice what a pretty hand Emily has? As pretty as mine when I was young. And an elbow like a cat's. Cousin Susan Murray had an elbow like that. It's odd. She has more Murray points than star points, and yet she looks like the stars and not like the Murrays. What odd sums in addition we all are. The answer is never what you'd expect. Caroline, what a pity Jarback isn't home. He'd like Emily. I have a feeling he'd like Emily. Jarback's the only priest that'll ever go to heaven, Emily. Let's have a look at your ankles. Emily rather unwillingly put out her foot. Aunt Nancy nodded her satisfaction. Mary Shipley's ankle. Only one in a generation has it. I had it. The Murray ankles are thick. Even your mother's ankles were thick. Look at that instep, Caroline. Emily, you're not a beauty, but if you learn to use your eyes and hands and feet and ankles properly, you'll pass for one. The men are easily fooled, and if the women say you're not, 'twill be held for jealousy. Emily decided that this was a good opportunity to find out something that had puzzled her. Old Mr. Kelly said I had come hither eyes, Aunt Nancy, have I? And what are come hither eyes? Old Mr. Kelly, or Jock Kelly's an old ass. If you have it, Jock Kelly's an old ass. You haven't come hither eyes. It wouldn't be a Murray tradition, Aunt Nancy laughed. The Murrays have keep your distance eyes, and so have you, though your lashes contradict them a little bit, but sometimes eyes are just like that. Combined with certain other points, they're quite effective as come hither eyes. Men go by contraries oftener than not. If you tell them to keep off, they'll come on. My own Nathaniel now, the only way to get him to do anything was to coax him to do the opposite. Remember, Caroline? Have another cookie, Emily. Well, I haven't had one yet, said Emily. These cookies looked very tempting, and she had been wishing they might be passed. She didn't know why Aunt Nancy and Caroline both laughed. Caroline's laugh was unpleasant, a dry, rusty sort of laugh. No juice in it, Emily decided. She thought she would write it in her description that Caroline had a thin, rattling laugh. What do you think of us? Demanded Aunt Nancy. Come now, what do you think of us? Emily was dreadfully embarrassed. She had just been thinking of writing that Aunt Nancy looked withered and shriveled, but one couldn't say that. One just couldn't. Tell the truth and shame the devil, said Aunt Nancy. Well, that's not a fair question, cried Emily. You think, said Aunt Nancy, grinning, that I'm a hideous old hag, and that Caroline isn't quite human. She isn't. She never was. But you should have seen me 70 years ago. I was the handsomest of all the handsome Murrays. The men were mad about me. When I married Nat Priest, his 3 brothers could have cut his throat. One cut his own. Oh, I played havoc in my time. All I regret is I can't live it over. 'Twas a grand life while it lasted. I queened it over them. The women hated me, of course, but all but Caroline here. You worshipped me, didn't you, Caroline? You worshipped me yet, don't you? Caroline, I wish you didn't have a wart on your nose. Emily was beginning to feel tired and bewildered. It was interesting, and Aunt Nancy was kind enough in her strange ways, but at home, Ilse and Perry and Teddy would be foregathering in Lofty John's bush for their evening revel, and Saucy Sal would be sitting on the dairy steps, waiting for Cousin Jimmy to give her the froth. Emily suddenly realized that she was homesick for New Moon. The child's tired, said Aunt Nancy. Take her to bed, Caroline. Put her in the pink room. Emily followed Caroline through the back hall, through the kitchen, through the front hall, up the stairs, down a long hall, through a long side hall. Where on earth was she being taken? Finally, they reached a large room. Caroline set down the lamp and asked Emily if she had a nightgown. Of course I have. Do you suppose that Aunt Elizabeth would have let me come here without a nightgown? Emily was quite indignant. Nancy says you can sleep as long as you like in the morning, said Caroline. Good night. Nancy and I sleep in the old wing, of course, and the rest of us sleep well in our graves. With this cryptic remark, Caroline trotted out and shut the door. Emily sat down on an embroidered ottoman and looked about her. The window curtains were of faded pink brocade, and the walls were hung with pink paper decorated with diamonds of rose chains. It made a very pretty fairy paper, as Emily found by cocking her eyes at it. There was a green carpet on the floor, so lavishly splashed with big pink roses that Emily was almost afraid to walk on it. She decided that the room was a very, very splendid one. But I have to sleep here alone, so I must say my prayers very carefully, she reflected. She undressed rather hastily, blew out the light, and got into bed. She covered herself up to her chin and lay there, staring at the high white ceiling. She had grown so used to Aunt Elizabeth's curtained bed that she felt curiously unsheltered in this low, modern one. But at least the window was wide open. Evidently, Aunt Nancy did not share Aunt Elizabeth's horror of night air. Through it, Emily could see summer fields lying in the magic of a rising yellow moon. But the room was big and ghostly. She felt horribly far away from everybody. She was lonesome and homesick. She thought of old Kelly and his toad ointment. Perhaps he did boil the toads alive after all. This hideous thought tormented her. It was awful to think of toads or anything being boiled alive. She had never slept alone before. Suddenly she was frightened. How the window rattled. It sounded terribly as if somebody or something were trying to get in. She thought of Ilse's ghost, a ghost you couldn't see but could hear and feel, and something especially spooky in the way of ghosts. She thought of the stone dogs that went woo at midnight. A dog did begin to howl somewhere. Emily felt a cold perspiration on her brow. What had Caroline meant about the rest of them sleeping well in their graves? The floor creaked. Wasn't there somebody or something tiptoeing around outside the door? Didn't something move in the corner? There were mysterious sounds in the long hall. I won't be scared, said Emily. I won't think of those things, and tomorrow I'll write down all about how I feel now. And then she did hear something. right behind the wall at the head of the bed. There was no mistake about it. It was not imagination. She heard distinctly strange, uncanny noises, as if stiff silk dresses were rubbing against each other, as if fluttering wings fanned the air, and there were soft, low, muffled sounds like tiny children's cries or moans. They lasted. They kept on. And now and then they would die away and then start up again. Emily cowered under the bedclothes, cold with real terror. Before, her fright had been only on the surface. She had known there was nothing to fear, even while she feared it. Something in her braced her to endure. But this was no mistake, no imagination. The rustles and flutterings and cries and moans were all too real. Wither Grange suddenly became a dreadful, uncanny place. Ilse was right, it was haunted. And she was all alone here with miles of rooms and halls between her and any human being. It was cruel of Aunt Nancy to put her in a haunted room. Aunt Nancy must have known it was haunted. Cruel old Aunt Nancy with her ghoulish pride in men who had killed themselves for her. Oh, if she were back in dear New Moon with Aunt Elizabeth beside her. Aunt Elizabeth was not an ideal bedfellow, but she was flesh and blood. And if the windows were hermetically sealed, they kept out spooks as well as night air. Perhaps it won't be so bad if I say my prayers over again, thought Emily, but even that didn't help much. To the end of her life, Emily never forgot that first horrible night at Wither Grange. She was so tired that sometimes she dozed fitfully off, only to be awakened in a few minutes in a panic by the rustling and muffled moans behind her bed. Every ghost and groan, every tortured spirit and bleeding nun of the books she had read came into her mind. Aunt Elizabeth was right. Novels aren't fit to read, she thought. Oh, I will die here of fright. I know I will. I know I'm a coward. I can't be brave. When morning came, the room was bright with sunshine and free from mysterious sounds. Emily got up, dressed, and found her way to the old wing. She was pale with black-ringed eyes, but resolute. "And how'd you sleep?" asked Aunt Nancy graciously. Emily ignored the question. "I want to go home today," she said. Aunt Nancy stared. "Home? Nonsense. Are you such a homesick baby as that?" "I'm not homesick, not very, but I must go home." "You can't. There's no one here to take you. You don't expect Caroline can drive you to Blair Water, do you? Then I'll walk." Aunt Nancy thumped her stick angrily on the floor. "You'll stay right here until I'm ready for you to go, Miss. I never tolerate any whims but my own. Caroline knows that, don't you, Caroline? Sit down to your breakfast and eat." Aunt Nancy glared at Emily. "I won't stay here," said Emily. "I won't stay another night in that horrible haunted room. It was cruel of you to put me in there. If I was Salome and I asked your head on a charger, hoity-toity. What nonsense is this about a haunted room? We've no ghosts at Wither Grange, have we, Caroline? We don't consider them hygienic. We have something dreadful in that room. It rustled and moaned and cried all night long in the wall behind my bed. I won't stay." Emily's tears came in spite of her efforts to repress them. She was so unstrung nervously that she couldn't help crying. It lacked but little of hysterics with her already. Aunt Nancy looked at Caroline, and Caroline looked back at Aunt Nancy. "We should have told her, Caroline. It's our fault. I clean forgot. It's so long since anyone slept in the pink room. No wonder she was frightened. Emily, you poor child. It's a shame. It should serve me right to have my head on a charger, you vindictive scrap. We should have told you." "Told me what?" "About the swallows in the chimney. That's what you heard. The big central chimney goes right up through the walls behind your bed. It's never used now since the fireplaces were built in. The swallows nest there, hundreds of them. They do make an uncanny noise, fluttering and quarreling as they do." Emily felt foolish and ashamed, much more ashamed than she needed to feel, for her experience had been a very trying one, and older folks that had been woefully frightened of nights in the pink room at Wither Grange. Nancy Priest had put people into that room, sometimes expressly to scare them, but to do her justice, she really had forgotten in Emily's case, and was very sorry. Emily said no more about going home. Caroline and Aunt Nancy were both very kind to her that day. She had a good nap in the afternoon, and when the second night came, she went straight to the pink room and slept soundly. The rustles and cries were as distinct as ever, but swallows and specters were two entirely different things. After all, I think I'll like Wither Grange, thought Emily. Chapter 24, A Different Kind of Happiness. July 20th. Dear Father, I have been a fortnight at Weather Grange and I have not written to you once, but I thought of you every day. I had to write to Aunt Laura and Ilse and Teddy and Cousin Jimmy and Perry, and between times I'm having such fun. The first night I was here I did not think I was going to be happy, but I am. Only it's a different kind from New Moon happiness. Aunt Nancy and Caroline are very good to me and let me do exactly as I like. This is so agreeable. They're very sarcastic to each other, but I think they are a good bit like Ilse and me. They fight quite frequently, but love each other very hard between times. I'm sure Caroline isn't a witch, but I would like to know what she thinks of when she's alone all by herself. Aunt Nancy is not pretty any longer, but she is very aristocratic looking. She doesn't walk much because of her rheumatism, so she sits mostly in her back parlor and reads and knits lace or plays cards with Caroline. I talk to her a great deal because she says it amuses her, and I have told her a great many things, but I never told her that I write poetry. If I did, I know she would make me recite it to her, and I feel she is not the right person to recite your poetry to. And I do not talk about you or Mother to her, though she tries to make me. I told her all about Lofty John and his bush and going to Father Cassidy. She chuckled over that and said she always liked to talk to a Catholic priest because they were the only men in the world a woman could talk to for more than 10 minutes without other women saying she was throwing herself at their heels. Aunt Nancy says a great many things like that. She and Caroline talk a great deal to each other about things that happened in the Priest and Murray families. I like to sit and listen. They don't stop just as things are getting interesting the way Aunt Elizabeth and Aunt Laura do. A good many things I don't understand, but I will remember them and I will find out about them at some point. I've written descriptions of Aunt Nancy and Aunt Caroline in my Jimmy book. I keep the book hid between the wardrobe in my room because I found Aunt Caroline rummaging in my trunk one day. I must not call Aunt Nancy Great Aunt. She says it makes her feel like a Methuselah. She tells me all about the men who were in love with her. It seems to me they all behaved pretty much the same. I don't think that was exciting, but she says it was. She tells me all about all the parties and dances they used to have here long ago. Weather Grange is bigger than New Moon, and the furniture is much handsomer, but it's harder to feel acquainted with it. There are many interesting things in this house. I love to look at them. There's a Jacobite glass on a stand in the parlor. It was a glass an old ancestor of the priest had long ago in Scotland, and it had a thistle and a rose on it. They used it to drink Prince Charlie's health with, and for no other purpose. It was very valuable heirloom, and Aunt Nancy prizes it highly. And she has a pickled snake in a big glass jar in the china cabinet. It's hideous, but very fascinating. I shiver when I see it, but yet I go to look at it every day. Something seems to drag me to it. Aunt Nancy has a bureau in her room with glass knobs and a vase shaped like a green fish sitting up on end, and a Chinese dragon with a curly tail, and a case of sweet little stuffed hummingbirds, and a sand glass for boiling eggs by, and a framed wreath made out of the hair of all the dead priests, and lots of old daguerreotypes. But the thing I like the best of all is a great silvery shining ball hanging from the lamp in the parlor. It reflects everything like a little fairy world. Aunt Nancy calls it a gazing ball and says that when she is dead I am to have it. I wish she hadn't said that, because I want the ball so much that I can't help wondering when she'll die, and that makes me feel wicked. I'm to have the cheesy cat door knocker and her gold earrings too. These are Murray heirlooms. Aunt Nancy says the priest heirlooms must go to the priests. I like the little cheesy cat, but I don't want the earrings. I'd rather not have people notice my ears. I have to sleep alone. I feel frightened, but I think if I could get over being frightened, I'd like it. I'm allowed to go into the kitchen and help Caroline cook. Caroline's a good cook, but sometimes she makes a mistake, and this vexes Aunt Nancy because she likes nice things to eat. The other day, Caroline made the barley soup too thick, and when Aunt Nancy looked at her plate, she said, "Lord, is this dinner or a poultice?" Caroline said, "It's good enough for a priest, and what's good enough for a priest is good enough for a Murray." And Aunt Nancy said, "Woman, the priests eat of the crumbs that fall from the Murray's tables." And Caroline was so mad that she cried. And Aunt Nancy said to me, "Emily, never marry a priest, just like old Kelly, when I have no notion of marrying any one of them. I don't like any of them. I've seen very much, but they seem to me a good deal like other people. Jim is the best of them, but impatient. I like the Wither Grange breakfast better than the New Moon breakfast, I have to say. We have toast and bacon and marmalade, which is much nicer than porridge. Sunday's more amusing here than at New Moon, but not so holy. Nice for a change. Aunt Nancy can't go to church or knit lace, so she and Caroline play cards all day. But she says I must never do it, that she is just a bad example. I love to look at Aunt Nancy's big parlor Bible because there are so many interesting things in it. Pieces of dresses and hair and poetry and old tin types and accounts of deaths and weddings. I found a piece about my own birth, and it gave me a strange feeling. In the afternoon, some of the priests come to see Aunt Nancy and stay to supper. Leslie Priest always comes. He's Aunt Nancy's favorite nephew, so Jim says. I think that's because he pays her compliments. But I saw him wink at Isaac Priest once when he paid her one. I don't like him. He treats me as if I were a mere child. Aunt Nancy says terrible things to them, but they all just laugh. I can read all the books in Aunt Nancy's bookcase except the row on the top shelf. I wonder why I can't read them. Aunt Nancy said they were French novels, but I just peeped one and it was English. I wonder if Aunt Nancy tells lies. The place I love best is down at Bay Shore. Some parts of the shore are very steep, and there are such nice woodsy unexpected places all along it. I wander there and compose poetry. I miss Ilse and Teddy and Perry and Saucy Sally a great deal. I had a letter from Ilse today. She wrote me that they couldn't do anything more about the Midsummer Night's Dream until I got back. It feels nice to be so necessary. Aunt Nancy doesn't like Aunt Elizabeth. She called her a tyrant one day, and then she said Jimmy Murray was a very clever boy. Elizabeth Murray killed his intellect with her temper. And nothing was done to her. If she had killed his body, she would have been a murderess. The other was worse, if you ask me. I do not like Aunt Elizabeth at times myself, but I felt, dear father, that I must stand up for my family, and I said, I do not want to hear such things said of my Aunt Elizabeth. And I just gave Aunt Nancy a look, and she said, well, Saucebox, my brother Archibald will never be dead as long as you're alive. If you don't want to hear things, don't hang around when Caroline and I are talking. I notice there are plenty of things you do like to hear. This was sarcasm, father, but I still feel Aunt Nancy likes me, but perhaps she will not like me for very long. Jim Priest says she is fickle and never liked anyone, even her husband, for very long, but after she has been sarcastic to me, she always tells Caroline to give me a piece of pie, so I don't mind the sarcasm. She lets me have real tea, too, and I like it. At New Moon, Aunt Elizabeth won't give me anything but cambric tea because it's best for my health. Aunt Nancy says the way to be healthy is to eat just what you want and never think about your stomach, but then she was never threatened with consumption. She says I needn't be a bit frightened of dying of consumption because I have too much ginger in me. That's a comforting thought. The only time I don't like Aunt Nancy is when she begins talking about the different parts of me and the effect they will have on the men. It makes me feel so silly. I will write to you oftener than this, dear father. I feel I've been neglecting you. P.S. I'm afraid there are some mistakes in the spelling in this letter. I forgot to bring my dictionary with me. July 22nd. Oh, dear father, I'm in a dreadful scrape. I don't know what I'm to do. Oh, father, I've broken Aunt Nancy's Jacobite glass. It seems to me like a dreadful dream. I went into the parlor today to look at the pickled snake, and just as I was turning away, my sleeve caught the Jacobite glass, and over it went on the hearth and shivered into fragments. At first, I rushed out and left them there, but afterwards I went back and carefully gathered them up and hid them in a box behind the sofa. Aunt Nancy never goes into the parlor now, and Caroline not very often, and perhaps they may not miss the glass until I go home, but it haunts me. I keep thinking of it all the time, and I can't enjoy anything. I know Aunt Nancy will be furious and never forgive me if she finds out. I could not sleep all night for worrying about it. Jim Priest came down to play with me today, but he said there was no fun in me, and he went home. The priests mostly say what they think. Of course there was no fun in me. How could there be? I wonder if it would do any good to pray about it. I don't feel as if it would be right to pray because I'm deceiving Aunt Nancy. July 24th. Dear Father, this is a very strange world. Nothing ever turns out just like what you expect. Last night I couldn't sleep again. I was so worried. I thought I was a coward and doing an underhanded thing and not living up to my traditions. At last it got so bad I couldn't do it. And I couldn't stand it. I can bear it when other people have a bad opinion of me, but it hurts too much when I have a bad opinion of myself. So I got out of bed and went right back through all those halls to the back parlor. Aunt Nancy was still there all alone playing solitaire. She said, "What on earth was I doing out of bed at such an hour?" And I just said, short and quick, "I broke your Jacobite glass yesterday and I hid the pieces under the sofa." And then I waited for the storm to burst, but Aunt Nancy said, "What a blessing. I've often wanted to smash it, but I never had the courage. All the Priest clan are waiting for me to die to get that glass, and they quarrel over it, and I'm tickled to think that none of them can have it now. And yet I can't pick a fuss with me over smashing it. Get off to bed and get your beauty sleep." I said, "Aren't you mad at all, Aunt Nancy?" If it had been a Murray heirloom, I'd have torn up the turf," Aunt Nancy said. "But I don't care about the Priest things." So I went back to bed, dear father, and I felt very relieved, but not so heroic. I had a letter from Ilsa today. She says Saucy Sal has had kittens at last. I feel that I ought to be home there to see them. Likely Aunt Elizabeth will have them all drowned before I get back. I had a letter from Teddy, too. Not much of a letter, but all filled with little pictures of Ilsa and Perry and the tansy patch and Lofty John's bush. They made me feel homesick. July 28th. Oh, Father dear, I have found out all about the misery of Ilsa's mother. It's so terrible I can't write it down. Even to you. I cannot believe it, but Aunt Nancy says it's true. I did not think there could be such terrible things in the world. No, I can't believe it, and I won't believe it no matter who says it's true. I know Ilsa's mother couldn't have done anything like that. There must have been a fearful mistake somewhere. I'm so unhappy and feel as if I could never be happy anymore. Last night I wept on my pillow, like the heroines in Aunt Nancy's books do. And that is the end of chapter 24. I hope you guys enjoyed these 2 chapters. Those are 2 of my favorite chapters, I think. I love seeing her interact with Aunt Nancy. Aunt Nancy is so much more in line with, like, Emily's spirit. And yet it seems Emily's not quite sure what to do with that. So I like that a lot. Anyway, I hope you're having a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday with another vlog. Bye, guys.